Welcome to Because the Beatles, the podcast about the Beatles, everything about the Beatles 24/8. I'm Allison.
And I'm Erica. And before we start, be sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts, or stream us on Spotify and on YouTube. And if you're enjoying BC the Beatles, feel free to leave us a preferably 5-star review so other Beatlemaniacs can find us.
Also, don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter/X, and TikTok. We'll be posting videos, photos, and more from this episode and beyond. And don't forget, you can always email us at bcthebeatles@gmail.com.
And you might want to email us after this episode because we've got a very special guest today.
We do. We're so excited. It's so cool to keep the Let It Be party rolling here at the party bus.
Mm-hmm. This special guest today is the great Kevin Harrington, who most Beatles fans will recognize as the Redhead on the Roof in the Let It Be and Get Back films. At the time, Kevin was only 18 years old, but had been working for the Beatles in some capacity for years, first as an errand boy at NEMS, and then as an assistant to Brian Epstein.
Yeah, he worked alongside Mal Evans as the Beatles' quote-unquote roadie. He managed their equipment. And he is billed as such in the Let It Be credits. After the Beatles broke up, Kevin stayed closely in the fold, even living at Friar Park with George and Patti during the recording of All Things Must Pass. Then he struck out on his own in the 70s and beyond and was a tour manager with some of the biggest names in music, including Wishbone Ash, Motorhead, Petula Clark, Ted Nugent, Tina Turner, and more. And he also shares a little bit about that with us later in the episode.
Yes, we are so excited to have this absolutely unique perspective on what it was like to be in the Beatles circle and to be on that rooftop that day.
And as Kevin will tell us in a little bit, he was only 15 when he came to work for the Beatles Enterprise for NEMS. Absolutely crazy. I was lucky enough to have dinner with Kevin when I was in London in December with our friend Simon Weitzman. So I was very excited to have Kevin come on the pod, and I'm excited for you guys to hear the interview. It was really fun.
Yes, it was a lovely interview. And if you're interested, he also has a memoir that he wrote about his time with the Beatles. Came out about 10 years ago, called Who's That Redhead on the Roof?
Who's the redhead on the roof? Yeah, the question of the hour. I think a lot of people have been asking that lately.
Yeah, especially with the extra red that the Mal technology provided.
Yes, the red I go and I pay for every 8 weeks or so.
I call it Scylla Red.
Scylla Red. I'm going to ask for that next time I go to the hairdresser. Just be like, Scylla Red, please.
It should be a shade.
Exactly. If they don't know what I'm talking about, I'm going to fire my hairdresser. That's a good plan.
You go fire your hairdresser. And while she does that, let's listen to our interview with Kevin Harrington.
So, Kevin, have you seen the new Let It Be?
No, I haven't.
Well, you've seen Get Back.
Most of it, yes. I found it sort of tedious.
Oh, yeah? Why is that?
It's very boring when you're sitting around just waiting. I mean, I know there's great music being created and everything else, but when you're working, it can get kind of boring just sitting around waiting for hours.
Well, it sounded like from your memoir that a lot of your part was not only waiting, but kind of sitting off to the side too. So probably pretty isolating.
Yeah, a lot of the time, the sidelines can sometimes be just 10 feet away because it was quite boring. And watching it, I know it was fascinating for everybody else. Yeah, it brought back some lovely memories, but it was, all in all, it's just a thing that I don't particularly want to go through again.
I hear that. I don't think I'd really appreciate having hours and hours of my day job. Having me have to rewatch that, I'm sure I'd be bored to pieces.
Yeah, exactly. But I'm glad everybody else enjoyed it.
Yeah, definitely. And you were so young, and with the, it's funny because with the restoration of the footage, and Get Back and now in Let It Be, your red hair is so red.
Yeah.
You're such a baby with the red hair.
Yes, it was pretty standoutish. That's why I always got caught when I was a naughty boy, you see.
You couldn't hide.
No, I couldn't hide. And that was also when I didn't realize hats made a big difference.
Speaking of being a boy, something very unusual I thought about your career is that you started working for NEMS and for Brian Epstein when you were just 15. Can you tell us the story? I mean, is it true that you answered an ad in the paper and that's how you started?
I was working on the building sites as an electrician's mate, and it was a winter and it was cold and it was horrible. And I was working for my oldest brother. Well, my Next brother down said, I'll find you a job. And he looked in the local paper. In London, there's a paper called The Evening Standard. It came out every day. And he said, here's a job, Kevin, NEMS Enterprises, office boy. It's Brian Epstein's company. He knew who Epstein was and what NEMS was. And so I applied and I got the job. And 26th of January, 1965, I was 15.
Had you been an active participant in Beatlemania before that?
No. I grew up with Beatles music, sure. Nobody could not.
Mhm.
But also Tamla. I was well into Four Tops and that. So it was...
Motown.
Yeah. So I was not a Beatles fan per se. I liked their music, and I used to shake my hair and go, woo, and all of that. But, I never went to shows or followed them that closely.
Well, that probably helped you get the job. You weren't starstruck and you could just do the job.
Well, it was just a junior. It was just a junior's job, as you say over here. It was just an office boy. Even if you were starstruck, it wouldn't have made that much difference. But yeah, I don't know. I just seemed to get the job and the fun started there, really.
Yeah. So what kind of fun are we talking? Like what would be your day-to-day in the NEMS office when you started?
Initially, it was taking care of the post and all of that. And my actual first main role was I used to go to the Beatles fan club down in the Seven Dials, about a mile away from the office. And that was my thing every morning. At 10 o'clock, I would go down there, take any fan mail or mail that needed to be taken there, and then pick up any mail from there and bring it back and distribute it. That was the first little buzzy bit about the Beatles I got to know. And the rest of the time, it was just taking letters here and there and press releases for Tony Barrow's section. Yeah, it was just day-to-day running around, really. It was a lot of work, but it was, didn't seem to notice it, didn't mind it.
Aw. And then, your role kind of evolved because then you started working really closely with Brian, right?
Yes, I was third in line behind two other office boys. One of them was Mr. Epstein's personal office boy, because he had his private office in Hill House. He had another office at his house in Chapel Street. And then, of course, there was NEMS. So twice a day, when I got the gig, just looking after his office, I would just do the rounds, NEMS, Hill House, Chapel Street, and then back. But I'd also be there during the day in case I had to deliver any letters, pick up anything for him, anything urgent. I mean, the first time I met him was in a small theatre in the West End. I was instructed to go and wait in the lobby, and Mr. Epstein would turn up and give me an envelope to urgently take to another theatre. I think it was another impresario or something. That was the first time I saw him in this. Yeah, it was an amazing experience. I was just standing in the shadows of this very dark lobby, and I heard voices. This voice said, "Is the boy from the office here yet?" And I stepped forward very meekly and said, "Yeah, Mr. Epstein." Yeah, that was it. That was my first meeting with the man.
Wow, that's such a cinematic moment. I could totally see it as you're describing it. And you know me, we talked about this before, Kevin. I love Brian. He's been such an influence on my life. Or should I say Mr. Epstein? I will defer to you on that.
Well, you called him what do you like? I only know him as Mr. I couldn't get that informal because I never knew him that informally, that's all.
Oh, no, I love it. I think that's so, it just speaks to who he was as a person and a boss to still have that respect, so many years later, especially after his death. What kind of boss was he? Sometimes people talk about that he was kind of ill-tempered and he could be kind of a tyrant. Did you find that was true?
You see, the thing is, I was in and out. It was, okay, this is what you got to do. Come and pick up the letter and then go. I was not around with, discussions and all of that interpersonal stuff. The only times I really got to know him, I think, let me put it like this. I was going to leave NEMS because I'd had enough being an office boy. I think it was after about 18 months or so. Mr. Epstein got to hear about it. And on the steps in Chapel Street, it's just as I was coming up from the kitchen, he met me on the stairs and he said, "Kevin, boy, I understand you want to leave." He said, "Don't do that. look around the office and see if there's anything you want to do.
Mm.
So that's what I did. I looked around. I eventually spied the production side with Tony Bramwell and Vivian Moynihan. The only time I remember him ever raising his voice was when we were at the Savile, and the Foremost were the support act for Georgie Fame and the Blue Flames. And Georgie was slightly worse for wear, should we say. And they Foremost found these big placards, big signs, about 3 foot big. And it said like whiskey, drunk, and they just proceeded to walk across the stage.
Oh my God.
While he's on stage performing. And Mr. Epstein, I do remember shouting at them backstage on the stairs outside the dressing rooms.
Oh, Brian must have hated that.
I think that's fair.
I never encountered his wrath or really heard it, But he was a businessman. Every businessman is a bit rough sometimes, but that's all I can say on that one.
Yeah, that's a great story.
Yeah. So eventually you ended up, I guess this was your choice when you were about to leave to move into the recording studio. And that's when you started working with Mal Evans, right?
When Mr. Epstein died and Apple started, Neil Aspinall took over running Apple. Try to imagine that in today's parlance, Neil Aspinall is a tour manager and Mal Evans is an equipment manager. When they went back into the studio to do the Double White album, as it was called, Neil wasn't going to spend 8 hours working in the office at Apple and then go and work and look after the boys in the studio. Impossible. Mm. So the dynamics changed. So Mal found himself alone doing 2 jobs, basically. And I just happened to be at the right place at the right time. I was the office boy at Apple. I managed to get a transfer from NEMS to Apple. And one day Mal said, Kevin, can you just get some groceries and drop them off at the studio? And I said, yeah, which I did that night. It must have been the first night they were starting the Double White album. And the next day, Mal didn't come into the office or I didn't hear anything. And I just thought they might want us to top up of food. So I took it upon myself to go out and buy half a bag of fresh stuff, like tomatoes, because I didn't even know what they'd eaten or whatever. I just took a punt, as they say, and took it down to the studio and knocked on the door. And Mal said, oh, no, I don't really need any of this, but come on in. So Mal took me into the studios. And, that was something else entirely. That was beyond my wildest expectations.
Yeah, talk more about that. What was that like to get into the studio with the Beatles and to witness recording?
It was frightening, you see, because we'd always been told that nobody ever goes in the studios. It's a no-go area. It's taboo. So to be invited in by Mal was just, and there's the 4 of them, just at the very early evening when they're just getting together and getting their gear. It was amazing. But after 10 minutes of just standing there like a lemon, just not knowing what to say or what to do, it was kind of time to leave.
Oh.
And so I left, and then the next day Mal came in and said, Kevin, do you want to come down and work with me and look after the equipment, and I'll show you what to do and I'll teach you everything I know? I said, yes. And I spent the next 2 years just working with Mal, looking after the boys. It was an absolutely amazing time. I was 18.
That's incredible.
So young.
You may know that Mal has kind of been in the Beatles zeitgeist at the moment since Ken Womack released that great biography of him last year. So what was it like to work so closely with Mal? And what were your first impressions of him as a person, as a boss, a colleague?
My first encounter with Mal, you see, when I was an office boy working at Mr. Epstein's side, I used to do a lot of visa runs, like going to the embassy and waiting in line to pick up visas for Mal and Neil or whoever. And my first real encounter with him was Mal and Neil had a flat in Sloane Street, and I had to take some visas round to them. And it was about 6 o'clock or so. And bear in mind that we finished work at 5. So that was one of the things. I didn't mind working any hours after hours. It didn't worry me at all. But I went round to Mal and Neil's, knocked on the door, and Neil answered. I walked in and he said, first thing is, do you want a drink? Got a Scotch and Coke. And Mal was sitting at a coffee table just with a big pile of pot in front of him, just rolling joint after joint after joint and putting them in cigarette packets and resealing them because they were just going to America and they didn't trust anybody to get them any pot in case it was a setup. So they took their own.
Sealed in a cigarette container so nobody would know what it was, right?
Yeah, they just put it under their arm and just walk through, put it on the counter in front of anybody because it's a sealed carton. So.
Before drug sniffing dogs.
But that was my first encounter with Mal and Neil. See, having said that, that's strictly not true. My first encounter of seeing Mal and Neil, and they impressed me when I first saw him, was I was an office boy at NEMS. And it was in 66. They'd just come back from must have been the Philippines. And Mal and Neil came in to do some accounts with Glenn, the accountant. And Laurie McCaffrey said to me one day, Kevin, she whispered, Mal and Neil are coming in today. And I whispered back, who's Mal and Neil? And she whispered back, they work for the boys. And I whispered back, who are the boys?
Oh, my goodness.
And then later on, these two guys just wafted in. Most impressive. An aura of confidence just followed them in the room. It was excellent.
Plus, Mal was extremely tall, too, right?
Yes, he was. Yes, he was. Well, he seemed it. I've seen photos of me and him together. He wasn't all that tall, but he seemed it then.
He was just larger than life.
Mal was very generous to me. The Beatles were his life, his reason for living. And for Mal to have confidence in me to, if you like, share his bit of life, which was very precious to him, I was most grateful. He was a good teacher. He was a lovely man, and I enjoyed his company. We've had many a night of laughs, many. Some good times with Mal, I must admit.
Mal taught you something amazing. I mean, he taught you how to deal with the Beatles gear, with Ringo's drums, and that eventually became one of your top jobs, right?
Yes, I mean, it was in the end. Basically, after about 3 weeks or so in the studio of setting this stuff up myself, that was it. That's all I did. I got there before Mal. I set everything up. I waited for Mal and the boys to turn up. Mal looked after the boys. He would deal with the office, liaise with any business side of it. And the equipment side of it was just left to me. And it was a good way of working, and then we came together and went and got fish and chips or whatever.
What a huge, important job, too.
I didn't sort of see it as an important job, but I'm sure I must have done. Now I don't remember thinking, wow, that was a really important job. It was just something that I was doing, and I was having a whale of a time. I knew it was a good job.
Yeah, for sure.
But it was just a job, just an amazing job.
So eventually, when you were in the recording studio, you started working with the Beatles, you met them. What was your first impression of each of them?
I first met them when they were doing Magical Mystery Tour. I was running around like a blue-ass fly, transporting cuts of film and going from the cutting rooms to the viewing rooms it was kind of a busy time. And that's when I was officially introduced to them by Neil in a small studio in Wardour Street. But that was a glance in, 10 minutes. I was invited in to watch some of the stuff that they'd done the day before. You see, I'd met them at Apple in Wigmore Street. When I was an office boy there, they came in every day almost. So they knew who I was anyway. They were always lovely. It was easygoing. It was just relaxed, really, which is kind of weird. It was, relaxed. So having known them, and as Paul lived in St. John's Wood, I would take letters up to him from the office in Wigmore Street, which is just a bus ride away. And one day I was knocked on the door. Paul said, "Hey, hello, Kevin, come on in." He says, "How are you getting back to the office?" I said, "I'm getting on the bus." He says, "Well, hang on, I'll get my coat and I'll come with you." So we walked down to the bus stop, waiting for the bus, and got on the bus. And I was grinning like an idiot.
I bet.
Wow.
The Cheshire Cat with the milk. It was unbelievable. So I knew them just not that well. I got a good welcome. George was absolutely wonderful on my first night. He was sitting down on the floor, just playing his guitar or whatever. And he asked me to come and sit down. So went and sat down and chatted with him for about 10 minutes or so. It was a lovely night. I was as nervous as anybody could ever be nervous, I think. But after a couple of days, that nervousness kind of went away. And it just became the norm. Just turn up at 6, set the gear up, wait for them to turn up, get them whatever they wanted. Then they start rehearsing or doing whatever they're going to do with a song, a tune. And then you just wait for hours. And in between that waiting, you would make a cup of tea or make several dozen cups of tea.
Yeah. When you were waiting, were you waiting in the studio with them? Or were you waiting like outside?
In the evening, once they'd all decided that they were going to rehearse with the equipment, like with guitars, rather than just sit down and learn the song together. So that would take an hour or two. So you would sit there and listen and just maybe go out and make some more tea. And then when they started recording, most of the time you'd be up in the control room. You might be bored after 2 hours of sitting in the studio listening. So you go upstairs and you listen, and then you might get bored. So, okay, you'll go to the lobby, and sit out there and get away from the music for a bit. But you can that time of night, you can always hear the music. So when the music stops, your ears prick up and you listen for the shout out. And then you go running or whatever. You're just there. You're constantly there. You have to be there in earshot.
Since you spent time upstairs in the control room, what were your impressions of George Martin?
George was a lovely man. George was very polite. I would be in the background. We would talk in the evenings when we turned up. Good evening, etc. How are you, etc., etc. The rest of the evening, it would be him and the band and the sound engineer, and I would just walk in and out occasionally, sit down on the chairs. I would just be a presence, that's all. I enjoyed his company, but, what was not to like, really? Thoroughly nice man,
As I'm listening to you, Kevin, describe all of this, it's astounding to me. Does it ever hit you and you're like, I was around this crazy cast of characters that people like Erica and myself and a bunch of other crazy Beatles fans and historians have spent, the whole lives, talking about, analyzing, researching, idolizing. Do you ever just go, wow, I did that? I was there.
Yes, I do. And it's funny because I sometimes think, I don't understand the Beatles phenomena. I never understood it. I understand it now a bit in the past, 10, 15 years, as I've met more people and stuff. Yeah, I find it strange, but I don't condemn it. It's,
No, yeah.
I just don't want to sound blasé about it. This is my problem, but that's what it was. I just happened to fall into this amazing place in time.
Well, I'm so curious because, you talk about being kind of like a gopher, like a runner for the Beatles. What were some of the things I would ask you to do? I read that one time, I don't know if this is true, that George asked you to clean his shoe.
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah, George just came back and said, I've trodden in some shit. It's like, hey, Kevin, clean this up. It's like, yeah, sure, George. Yeah, why not? He's walking shit all over the studio, so I didn't mind. They're not doing it to, be assholes. They're just going, yeah, fuck. Can you help? So you do. You go, there you go, yeah.
I guess better to clean the shoe than clean the floor after he walks all over it with that
There
shoe.
you go. John would say, we're setting up in a gallery tomorrow. Can you come and help? Yeah, sure. So you go and help at a gallery and you help put artworks up on the wall and stuff.
Wow.
That's what you do, or you change a set of guitar strings. Whatever they wanted, really, they got.
Would the gallery have been for Yoko?
Yeah, the UI exhibition.
Oh, that's so cool. That's awesome. Let's move into Apple Studios Twickenham and Let It Be, the topic of the moment, as it were. So, very famously, you and Mal quite literally open the Let It Be film by assembling the equipment. Can you tell us a little bit about Michael Lindsay Hogg and his direction, not just for the opening scene, but throughout filming? Because I imagine it must be pretty strange to be filmed and especially directed, while you're just doing your job every day.
For that opening sequence, I personally just found it weird that we're pushing this piano, and it was just, hey guys, can you just push this piano over that direction, and can you carry this?
So what you were being asked to do wasn't the way you would have done it on a normal day.
No, and we would most probably have used both hands, or Mal would have. It's anyway. As far as the direction, that's the only direction I ever got. The rest, the cameras were there, just filming whatever was going on, and I think the direction side just came with where to put the cameras, because you can't really direct the Beatles to do anything, because they're there just to make music, so it's not as if you can tell them to play this chord again because the camera angle wasn't right. You just put the cameras on and then you absorb what the camera sees, and that's it.
Right. What happens, happens.
What happens, happens.
One thing that happened, that you were there for George quitting the Beatles, which wasn't part of Let It Be, but it became a huge part of the Get Back film when Peter Jackson recut the footage. Do you remember what it was like in that experience? Was it a big deal at the moment?
For me, no, it wasn't. On the original Get Back, that's not there, but there's a sequence where I'm sitting about 30 feet away on a flight case, and Paul, I think, is speaking to Lindsay Hogg. And I, for some unknown reason, assumed that that was when George left. What I didn't realize until, 2 years ago, I was standing right next to George when he left.
Wow.
Yeah, that was a weird one. But would I have been listening to the conversation knowing the reason why George left? No. That conversation would have been theirs. Would I have heard it? Might have done. Doesn't necessarily mean that I would have listened to it. You see, I heard lots of things, but I never listened. It wasn't my job to listen, because then that's kind of snooping.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I was trusted to be there to not say anything. That was one of the cardinal rules. You never spoke to anybody about this stuff. And I never did. I've never spoken about the things that I've heard. And I don't think I will. And some of it now I've even forgotten. So that's all right.
Well, that's convenient.
They were personal conversations. And as far as I'm concerned, they should stay personal. I got too much respect for the position that I was given to break that.
Well, they hired the right person with integrity.
I like to think so.
Absolutely. Let's go to the roof, because that is your time to shine, Kevin.
Sure, yeah.
And obviously the moment that catapulted you into infamy, I don't think that's overstating it, because especially, everybody gets such a kick out of you being the one to kneel in front of John holding his lyrics for Dig a Pony.
I'm cringing now just with you saying it.
No. Oh, you should indulge it. It's
great.
It's so cool. For me, when I rewatched it, Erica and I went to the New York premiere of the Let It Be film. So we saw it on the big screen in the front row. So it was huge right in front of us. But I was just so fixated and mesmerized by just how still you were. You were so still. I would have been shaking because it was so cold. And, you're really trying to hold these lyrics in a spot where John, who's blind as a bat, can see them. Not to mention, you're doing all this while you're smoking a cigarette. And I'm like, how is Kevin managing to do this? Were you nervous at all?
I should imagine I was. I don't feel any sort of memories of being nervous, but I think that's just because I've been around them for so many times. It was just another thing to do. You know what I mean? That's just the same as, wiping shit off of shoes.
Yeah, I guess so.
That's family.
One thing when I watch Let It Be, that the question I always have is, how did they get all that stuff onto the roof, that heavy, heavy electronic equipment in the wintertime? Were you part of putting that together?
I carried it.
Oh, God.
Oh, God.
What was it like to set that up?
Well, it was easy.
Really?
Yes, when I say it was easy, but from the basement to the roof, it was, 5 floors. They had a small lift, which had a very limited weight capacity. So I think I had to do about 5 or 6 journeys with all this equipment. Now, when you get to the top floor, you come out of the lift and you've got to go up another very tight staircase, like a dog leg, because of a low ceiling. It's awkward. And the drum kit and the small amps were easy. What wouldn't go up or couldn't turn around the corner was Paul's bass amp.
Oh, yeah, that thing was huge.
Yeah, and Billy's keyboards.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah, the base of his keyboards. I think we managed to get the actual keyboards around because they're quite squat. It was his speaker. So we actually had to remove a skylight, the roof just above the stairwell, and then lift up Paul's bass and the bass of the piano through that and then down and out. So I had to get Mal to help me to do that.
Wow.
Was it scary? Because that roof looked so rickety.
The roof was quite fragile.
Yeah.
Worried about the weight of all this equipment. So they built a temporary roof just with builders' planks.
Like 2x4 kind of things?
Yeah, or 2x6. And
2x6.
it just wasn't satisfactory, they're bent. But it did the job. But yeah, it was just in a day's work, just having moved their equipment around London to various studios and up and down stairs in various studios. Going up to the roof really was just another part of the gig.
So you didn't see the most recent Let It Be, but what was it like seeing it at the time? Was it depressing looking? Did it accurately depict the mood of the time?
I remember the original because I went to the premiere of that, and it did seem dark. Peter Jackson's one is how I had it in my head. Peter Jackson's was much more true, I must admit.
And how many times did people mistake you for Peter Asher after that footage came out?
Never.
Nobody ever mistook the two redheads for one another?
No, maybe it's because I don't wear glasses.
There you go.
Maybe. I swear, though, after the Let It Be restoration came out in Disney Plus, I've heard at least one person be like, blah, 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 Peter Asher. And I'm like, that's not Peter Asher. Especially because you could clearly hear John on the roof say, where's Kevin?
Yes.
And then Kevin appears.
As always.
As always, faithful.
Yes.
So you mentioned you went to the premiere of Let It Be, and you wrote in your memoir that you took an apple scruff as your date.
Yes. Yeah, well, they were outside just queuing up with all the other bands. And I got to know them over the year and a half or 2 years or whatever it was. I had a spare ticket and it was like, well, I'm sure one of them would love to see it. And there was Carol with an E. And I just invited her in. Yeah. It was just, why waste the seat?
Oh, she must have loved that.
I think she did.
Well, I'm sure, working with the Beatles wasn't bad for the ladies. So you had that on your side.
I did.
So then after the Beatles broke up, you worked with George for a while, and your memoir said you lived at Friar Park for a time, correct?
Yes. Yeah. That was just before they split up. This is when George first moved into Friar Park, which I think was the end of 1969, I think.
That sounds about right. Yeah.
But yeah, George said, listen, I've just moved into this massive big house and it's a bit lonely. There's only me, Terry and Patti, which is Terry Doran, George's assistant. Do you want to come and just make up the numbers for a bit? I said, yeah. Because you never said no. I said, yeah. And he said, right, bring in a bag tomorrow night. And that was it. I spent 4 months or so at Friar Park. That was an amazing experience.
Wow, those are some beautiful grounds.
When we first moved in, it was all overgrown and just totally derelict.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah. I did a lot with Terry, and Greg, George's cousin, came over from Miami. We did a lot of groundwork. Some of the stuff was just too big to be done, just by 2 or 3 ordinary blokes. But we did a lot of clearing, and it was quite an incredible time, I must admit. As gothic as mad. It was definitely House of Hammer House of Horrors.
Yeah, if anything would be haunted, it would probably be a place like that.
It was fantastic. Yeah, spooky.
Yeah. And another part of it is that you were sort of around for the whole, Eric Patti triangle, right? Is that about that time?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. Because Eric would start coming over. I know later you toured with Eric and the Dominoes, but were the vibes really tense?
I didn't pick any vibes up.
Oh, wow.
They were all just all friends as far as I was aware at the time. They were just all friends together. So,
Maybe that was the vibe because even yesterday, I think I saw a photo that I'd never seen before of Paul and George jamming at Patty and Eric's wedding. So maybe it was more amicable than we would imagine.
I think it was, that's
Yeah.
adults in the room, really. That's just life. And it just ended very well, so to speak.
Yeah. It's good when that can happen.
Did staying at Friar Park and working with George in that way, I know you did some work with the concert for Bangladesh. Is that how you continued to work with George? And what was that like to work with that project?
I left George about halfway through All Things Must Pass album. When Eric left or finished the sessions on that album with Bobby Whitlock, Jim Gordon, and Carl Radle, that was the genesis of Derek and the Dominoes. And I was offered a job as a roadie. And so when they left that session, I left with them. And then I went on the road, did my own thing. And it was only when was it, 73, 74, Bangladesh happened. I got a call from Mal just saying, George is doing a charity thing in New York. Do you want to come and do the back line? And I just said, yeah. And I got that gig. That was quite an amazing turn up for the book and a great time.
What a cavalcade of superstars.
Oh, unbelievable. That was a good experience.
I bet. We mentioned Derek and the Dominoes, but the variety of people you toured with after your career with the Beatles, from Motorhead to Tina Turner to Petula Clark, it's so cool. It reads like, one of my fever dreams of a music festival that I would love to see. So what were your touring years like through the 70s and beyond?
They were amazing. It really kicked off with Wishbone Ash.
Yeah, right.
Because I decided after the Stones, I really didn't want to be a roadie. I realized I wasn't cut out to be a roadie. I was more into looking after the bands, not the equipment. And so I became a tour manager, a personal manager. Unbelievable experiences, unbelievable. Nothing like the Beatles. The Beatles changed my life in the music industry way. Derek and the Dominoes changed my life into sex, drugs, and rock and roll is the only way I can really describe Derek and the Dominoes and the 70s.
I was going to say, such the vibe of the 70s when we think of what the touring world looked like then.
And it was that. And it was absolutely fantastic, unbelievable. But then when you become a freelance tour manager, you have to work. So you can't pick and choose.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever tour is staring you and paying you, and you just go with it. And I worked with some cabaret artists, as you said, Petula Clark, Matt Monro. With Tina Turner, that was in the cabaret setting in the Middle East, in like hotels.
Oh, wow.
They were just as rocking in those ballrooms in these posh hotels.
Wow. I can't imagine Tina Turner in a ballroom.
See, the thing is, it's like any gig. This is the point. It's like any show that you see. It doesn't matter about the venue. It's who's on stage and what the audience are like. As long as you have a stage and a sound system and a rock and roll artist, the audience will love it. So that didn't really matter. And I did 2 tours with her in the Middle East, and they were just rock and roll stupidity. But you just don't have any of the sex and drugs and rock and roll highlights. It was a different kind of thing. I did Hot Chocolate there. Matt Monro, as I said, just loads of acts. Chaz and Dave, Tommy Cooper, the list just goes on and on and on.
Do you have a favorite, Kevin?
Absolutely. It's a guy called Tommy Cooper. I'm not too sure if you would have heard of.
I don't think I've heard of him.
I don't think so.
Basically, he was a magician.
Oh.
That's a shakeup.
Yeah. No, but he was funny. And I grew up with him. And he's always been kind of a hero of mine.
Aw.
And he's made everybody laugh. that's ever seen him, because
Oh.
he's silly and stupid, but an excellent magician. I was proud to have spent a couple of weeks touring with him in the Middle East, and that is up there with working for the Beatles as far as I'm concerned. This man you haven't heard of, just a hero of mine. I spent 2 years doing cabaret in these hotels, traveling around the Middle East, and I got offered Motorhead at the end of my 2 years. Do you know Ralph McTell?
It kind of sounds familiar.
He had a hit in the late 70s, maybe early 80s with Streets of London, folk singer.
Oh,
Okay.
I did this 2-week stint just doing these smaller venues in the Middle East. And it was a nice, relaxed, folk singer. There can't be any more relaxing than that. Bless him. But in my head, it's boring. And I got a call the day before I arrived back in London from Doug Smith asking me if I wanted to go on the road with Motorhead. And so when that was the first thing my wife said to me, Doug wants you to go on the road with Motorhead. Boom. That was it. Yes, please. Yes, please.
amazing.
Oh my God. How did you survive? How are you alive today?
I did survive, but it was a close run thing. It was very
Yeah.
close, very close, in fact.
Yes. Lemmy is legendary.
Yeah, a lovely man. A lot of respect for Lemmy, bless him.
Oh, yeah. Rest in peace, Lemmy.
Well, this has been a wonderful conversation. We're so happy that you got to join us today. And
Yeah.
one last thing, you wrote a memoir that we've talked about here and there throughout this interview. Can you tell us a little bit more about it and where our listeners can find it?
It's basically a story of 4 years of my life, from the age of 16 to 20, my time with working for the Beatles, how I got there, etc., and what I did. It's on Amazon and all the other ebook suppliers, I think. Who's the Redhead on the Roof by Kevin Harrington.
Perfect title.
That was on a blog. Some guy had written in asking, who's the Redhead on the Roof? And when I saw that, I thought, you know what? That'd be a good title.
Yeah, there's a ring to that for sure.
Yeah, because I'm sure there's lots of people going, who's that on the roof?
And I saw, Kevin, that you're going to be at International Beatle Week this year in Liverpool.
Yes.
I'm assuming that's your first time there?
Yes, it should have been last year, but I got COVID. So,
Oh, no.
yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
I'm sure that'll be really fun.
I'm flattered that I've been asked.
I hope it's the start of a lot of appearances. We'd love to see you in the States at one of these fests that we do.
We'll see.
Well, thank you so much, Kevin. This has been so much fun. It's so great to reconnect.
So much fun to get some more insight on to all these things we've been watching, especially with the Let It Be coming out again and Get Back.
Yeah, it's never ending, is it?
There's always something.
All right, then, ladies, you take care. Thank you very much indeed.
You too. Thank you.
Bye, Kevin. Thank you.
Yeah. Bye.
Bye. Well, thanks again to Kevin for that delightful conversation. So much fun. Grab his book on Kindle, wherever you get your books, wherever you get your ebooks. And I hope you enjoyed this.
Yes, thank you again for listening to BC the Beatles. As always, subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or wherever you're listening right now. And please give us a rating/review so other Beatlemaniacs can find us.
And follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter/X, and TikTok. We'll be posting photos and more from this episode and beyond. And remember, you can always email us at bcthebeatles@gmail.com too. See you next time. Bye.
Bye.